now for part three. In part three, we're going to basically break down the digestive system into different parts and look at what each one of them, how each one of them functions. Let's start with the first part, which is, which is the tongue and the mouth. The tongue and the mouth is, remember, this mechanical digestion that takes place, which is done by the teeth. You have a bunch of salivary glands. There are three basic salivary glands: the parotid gland, the submandible gland, and the sublingual gland. You can actually feel your sublingual gland if you put your right under your jawline. If you kind of press against the top, against, like, where you feel your trachea coming to an end, if you press towards it, it'll literally shoot out jets of saliva into your mouth. So saliva itself has certain enzymatic qualities, and we will talk about that. Carbohydrate digestion starts in the mouth. There is salivary amylase in the saliva. The salivary glands are a part of the accessory organs. They're not a part of the digestive system, but they're accessory organs. So your food is mixed with the saliva. Once it's mixed, it's torn down, it's broken down into smaller pieces, and then mixed with saliva, and that is called the bolus. It's just a wet ball. It's like weird matzo ball. Oh, thinking of matzo ball too much. So it's basically that. It's like all the food gets mushy, it's mixed with saliva, and then it becomes into this little ball of food. Now this green ball of food has to travel through. Right in the front, you have the trachea. The C rings of the trachea. In the back of that is your esophagus. The hole that is in the middle right here, this picture doesn't like completely cover it, but it kind of goes all the way through, is your glottis. Glottis is the hole between the both of them. There is a flap called the epiglottis. The epiglottis opens up, giving access to this guy to go into the esophagus. From the esophagus, then it goes into the stomach. It's not that easy a process. So as it's going down, the process here of going through the esophagus is called peristalsis. I'm going to write that down. You will definitely see a couple of questions on that. P-E-R, damn, I'm bad at this. S-T-A-L-S-I-S. Peristalsis. If you look at the esophagus, I'm going to just draw like a rudimentary esophagus right here. This inside part, this hollow part, is called the lumen, L-U-M-E-N. The inside area of it, so this part of it, is made up of non-keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelial tissue. The body is organized on the basis of from small to big, right? So there's atoms. You put atoms together, you get molecules. You put molecules together, you get macromolecules. You put macromolecules together, you get cells. You put all this a few cells together, you get tissue. You put tissue together, you get an organ. Organs together, organ system. Organ systems together, organism. So in one of the previous chapters, we will talk about the different types of tissue. The inside of this is the lumen, and the inside is made up of non-keratinous, stratified, squamous epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is, it's also the same thing that's made that your skin is made up of. Is the epithelial tissue. Non-keratinized, meaning that it does not have the protein keratin, which is seen in your hair and nails, so it's not hard. The squamous, meaning it's kind of square shaped. Stratified, meaning it has multiple layers. That's all that word means. Whereas the outside of this here, it is a muscle. It has to contract. So it's like making sausage casing. Like, if you've ever seen sausage being put into a sausage casing, that's what it looks like. It's kind of pushed through by you press on one end, so it kind of bubbles out on the other end and it pushes through. So this area of the esophagus is made up of connective tissue. It has muscle fibers and it's connective tissue. Now this lumen situation, every organ in your body that has some kind of a hollow surface, the inside of the hollow surface that has a lumen is also always going to be made up of simple stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Different types of epithelial tissue, but essentially epithelial. There is a sphincter here. The sphincter is the cardiac sphincter. The cardiac sphincter is also connective tissue. It is a muscle. Now, the cardiac sphincter does many different things. When you have a heartburn, problem is with your cardiac sphincter. So once the food goes down it kind of puts pressure on the cardiac sphincter and then bubbles into the stomach. Remember, the stomach is very acidic. The stomach has hydrochloric acid, it has pepsin, all of this wonderful stuff. The sphincter, the most important part of the sphincter is to make sure that the acid does not move in here. So if you eat really spicy food, really drink, that kind of stuff, it kind of produces these gases that pushes against the sphincter and opens it up. And then you have heartburn. Heartburn is not heartburn. It's basically the acid here getting into the sphincter, into your esophagus. Your stomach is covered with a thick layer of mucus. There's a mucosal membrane that protects the stomach from the acid itself, but same mucus layer is not found in the esophagus right here. So as soon as the acid goes up, you're gonna find, it's gonna burn. That's why, like, people who are super bulimic, they usually have huge problems with their esophagus, and they also have the same acid, like weird acid erosion of their teeth. Like their teeth are like eroded to a nub. So that's because the acid from the stomach is pretty corrosive. Once the bolus has passed the cardiac sphincter, it reaches into the stomach, and at that point of time, it's called the chyme. So remember, the bolus is food, whatever steak and potatoes you've eaten. You chew, and it mixes up with saliva, which is secreted by 3 different salivary glands. The salivary glands are a part of the accessory organs. They are not a part of the digestive system. They're not like a part of the canal itself. They're not a part of the canal itself. And then once it goes through the esophagus through a process called peristalsis, which is basically the best way to think about peristalsis is, if you haven't seen it, go online and you'll see sausage being filled into a casing. That's basically how it looks. And then that portion, that the saliva plus food plus chewed up food, is called bolus. And then that bolus, once it reaches into the stomach, it mixes up with all these different gastric juices, and then it's called the chyme. If you eat something and you throw up like immediately, this is gonna sound super gross, but if you eat something and you throw up immediately, it's almost like tasteless. You don't feel any taste or anything, and it just comes out as like these little balls of food. You could try it with bread, but I don't suggest you do. But if you throw up after like 20-25 minutes, it's almost like this weird slurpy, sludgy kind of thing. You know what it reminds me of? If you go to the Asian store and you get that coconut water with little chunks of coconut in it, that's what it looks like. Like when you throw up at that stage, that's basically what it looks like. And it actually burns while coming up, because that food, once it's mixed with chyme, that food actually has acid. You keep doing it regularly, you'll have nubs for teeth. So let's look at the gastric juices. Again, I'm going to go into detail when I break it up. The gastric juice is basically the pH in your stomach. pH as in the potential of hydrogen, how many hydrogen ions are released within the system, is 2. 2 is almost like is hydrochloric acid. If you were able to extract the stomach acids without the food mixing it and increasing its pH, because the food that you're eating is between 5 and 7. So if you add 2 to 5 and 7, it kind of increases the pH slightly. If you were to take pure gastric juice and spit it out on a table, it would corrode. It's not a good idea. One of the biggest benefits of that is because it is so acidic, it tends to kill most of the bacteria. So when you are taking probiotic pills without without actually a buffer coating on it, like the cheaper ones that you get in the store, and they were usually in a liquid form, and they tell you, oh, this is probiotic and doesn't have a buffer coated. Most of them die in the stomach acids. So they also denature proteins. Proteins have 3D structures. So when proteins are made, they're single chain of proteins. This primary structure is a long chain of amino acids. Then they kind of fold upon themselves. They make secondary structures. They fold upon themselves, and they make tertiary structures. And then and couple of couple of secondary structures together make a tertiary structure. A couple of tertiary structures together make a quaternary structure. Usually, a functioning protein is a quaternary structure. When we talk about denaturing, because you have put this into an acidic environment, it tends to lose its shape. It kind of unravels, and once it is unraveled, it's completely useless. For example, if you take an egg, eggs, when you put them in heat, once you put the egg into and you made an omelet, you can't renature it. Basically, you have denatured the proteins in the egg. They kind of curdle. And you do the same thing with seafood. When you make ceviche, you can take a piece of fish, put it in an lime juice, and it kind of cooks it. It denatures all the proteins in it. The gastric juices basically contain hydrochloric acid and pepsin. Pepsin is okay, I need that. Is a protease. Basically what it means, it's something that breaks down proteins. The word protease just means that. It is an enzyme that breaks down proteins. It takes a long chain of proteins and kind of breaks it down into smaller peptides. Amino acid is the macromolecule here is the, oh my God, I'm an idiot. The polymer here is a protein. The monomer of it, the single unit of it, is an amino acid. Two amino acids are connected to one another with a covalent bond, and that covalent bond is called a peptide. So basically, protease does is it breaks down this large protein into smaller peptide molecules. Pepsin, however, is its active form. The stomach has different types of cells. There's chief cells, parietal cells, and mucosal cells. I think the next slide kind of goes into it, and I'll talk about that. Why doesn't the stomach damage itself? As I go through, I will. Okay, this is a good picture. If you take a cross section of the stomach, you will notice that it has a mucosal cell. The job of the mucosal cell is to actually create this thick layer of mucus. It's just that, mucus. It kind of covers and lines the inside of the stomach so that the stomach does not get burnt because of the acid. Now, when you have peptic ulcer, that's not caused because of, that's even caused because of bacteria, as they kind of bore into the mucus layer and expose the layer of the stomach to the acid, and then the acid burns it, so it's a burn, and then it kind of forms a scab, and then burns again, scab again, burns again, scab again. Now you have a tumor. The bacteria that does that is the H. pylori bacteria. It kind of bores through the mucosal layer. Then you have the other cell called as chief cells. Chief cells produce something called as pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is the inactive form of pepsin. Pepsin is only a pepsin. You can get pepsin from pepsinogen only when it combines with hydrochloric acid. Pepsinogen is the inactive form, because if you had a lot of pepsin just floating around in the stomach, that would be a bad thing because it breaks down proteins. At the end of the day, muscle tissue and all of those guys, they have a lot of proteins in them. So you don't want them to be just floating around in the stomach like you're carrying a bag full of water or something. You don't want that to happen. So it is in an inactive form where it doesn't function. It only starts to function when hydrochloric acid is pumped in. Hydrochloric acid is pumped in by the parietal cells. All of this is controlled by the brain, and we will talk about the different signals that the brain sends, so that you sometimes kind of hear your stomach when it's time to eat. You hear that growling sound in your stomach, and that's just the pumps activating because your brain has sent a signal that it's time for food. let me just kind of recap this. You must know what the mucosal cell does. The mucosal cell produces the mucus, chief cells, and parietal cells.